let us, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you over some Hasura Pro things that we've been working on, and the easiest way to try Hasura Pro out and the stuff that we were working on
You
is
already
now
know.
accessible on cloud. So I already have a project created on cloud, and what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is just explore some of these features. Things might be a little bit rough because we're still in beta, but the idea is that I'll just kind of take you over a few of these. We'd love to work together with you to kind of see what kind of issues you're facing, with what kind of questions you have around integrations and stuff like that, and iron it out as we move out of public beta into stable for the cloud. So once you've created your project, I have set it up with a Heroku database. So you can set it up with a Heroku database. And once you set it up, you'll be able to launch the console. You'll see that the console kind of has a login, which allows me to log in with either use the admin secret like we used to use on the console, but also because this is now on the cloud, I can also use a login with Hasura. So the idea is that you can invite collaborators and other team members to the console and not have console access exclusively via the admin secret. These two headers that you see are effectively the same thing as Accessor admin secret. And that's kind of how this works. To configure and kind of add more collaborators, you can kind of go in here and kind of add more collaborators via on the settings in the settings section, on the team section for this particular project. So I already have the Chinook dataset, my favorite dataset. I think it's time I get another dataset. I think last week in the workshop we used the Northwind dataset, which is also very nice. Which is what I can start using the next time. But the Northern dataset has way too many columns, so it's a little bit painful to browse. But in any case, for example, for example, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just make a query for albums and fetch all of the albums that I have. And let's just give this query a name. So let's say get albums. And so the name becomes a useful identifier for us. What I'll be able to do now is I'll be able to kind of go to metrics and see these metrics pop in. And if I head to operations, you'll see the operation history for all of the queries that you've made. The way this works is what Hasura is doing is basically there's a log collection system and a deeper instrumentation that allows collecting slightly more granular information. And this information can also be sent to something like a Datadog or a Prometheus and stuff like that to power gauges that you have. The Hasura UI for looking at these errors is usually only useful for, in production, useful for kind of more real-time applications or like more real-time debugging to see what's happening, this moment or what's happened in the last hour or so. But in practice, if you want to look at historical logs, a better system is to use a full logging system like Sumo Logic or New Relic or Datadog and stuff like that. Well, not New Relic so much, but more Datadog. And so let me just zoom this up a little bit so that you folks can see better. But here you can see that you can see the execution time, the response size, the operation ID, which will kind of help you trace through stuff. And then you can also just look at the query that this particular query was using, the SQL, but also the operation string itself and the session variables too. So this is fairly useful. I can, let me just try making a query that has an error. Right, and if I do that, what I should see is an error pop-up. And so you'll see that there's an error here that comes in here. So this is entirely asynchronous. So that means that it doesn't really affect what you have in. It doesn't affect the critical path of Hasura's query processing itself, but it's nice because it kind of gives you. There might be a little bit of a delay for that to come in, but it should be fairly real time for you to see what's happening. So incidentally, that system is also built with a Hasura, with a time scale actually, but which I think Shahid is going to be talking about tomorrow or the day after, which is a very interesting talk on how we're using Hasura at Hasura to do things. All right, next, I think what I can do is run a subscription. So Let's say that I run a subscription and I say I want albums where, and let's say ID less than 10, and ID and title. All right, and now what you'll see is if I see I have a subscription running. Let me just open this up in a different tab. And you kind of see me go through the login again. And so what we will see now is that we'll see that there's a WebSocket that's open with an open subscription, right? And this kind of gives us information about how many WebSockets we have open, and it gives us a sense of how many clients are connected with WebSockets, which is WebSocket monitoring is fairly cumbersome, but it's nice to be able to have a centralized place to just see how many WebSockets you have open across several instances and stuff like that. Now, you can also see a summary at the overview page, so that'll kind of give you a sense of, oh, okay, I have one active subscription, one active WebSocket. The reason why we differentiate between subscriptions and WebSockets is because you can also use WebSockets to send queries and mutations as well, right? The same client can open a WebSocket connection and send these other details as well, not just, and then you can also use it for subscriptions, of course. If I head to the subscription workers, I'll actually see the subscription that is running, which is nice to see, right? So, for example, I can look at the underlying subscription query that's running, and see that, and I can also get some information on how much time the last execution took, right? So I know that this subscription took. So if I use so if I see this, I see that the subscription takes, the refetch takes about 12 milliseconds, which means that, which is good, because if I might, even for subscriptions, I might need to add indexes to make the refetch better. The other piece here, let me just take a quick look. All right, cool. The other piece also is that we can just see a graph of operations of this particular worker. So we'll see, if more clients have gotten added, how many clients have gotten added for this particular subscription, right? Because Hasura uses the same subscription worker across multiple clients and stuff like that. So that was a quick look at the kind of APM stuff. And again, all of this can be sent to your Datadog or your Prometheus or whatever you have, and that integration should work. So do get in touch with us. You should, for a select few users, we'll be enabling a setting for you to kind of see a Datadog API key that pops up. And so you'll be able to add a Datadog API key that will let you also integrate with Datadog and over time other services as well. Next up, let's add, I think we should have an anonymous role somewhere. Let me just check. So let's add an anonymous role here to just kind of take a look at allow listing workflow feature. So for those of you who've already used allow listing, what this will help us do is kind of just build the allow list a little bit easier. And here I'm going to show you the query capturing business that I was talking about earlier today. So let's say without any checks, probably all, and let's say this. So let me just change this role to anonymous. It was interesting last time we were having a conversation that actually you don't need to have, you actually don't need to title the anonymous role anonymous. It can be, it can even be public. So that role name is actually not dependent on anything. But I think so right now it's admin. Let me just also remove the collaborated token as well. And so now what we want is we want this query to work. Right now, we'll see that it's not working because we haven't enabled this role. So that's kind of what I wanted to point out from the last workshop that we did, that anonymous is not a hard-coded setting. The reason why we're not seeing albums here is because we haven't told Hasura that the public role or the anonymous or the unauthenticated role is titled anonymous. This could have been anything. We can call it public. We can call it free tier or whatever we want. So let's just go and add that. So I'll just go to my environment variables, I'll add a new environment variable, and let's say unauthorized role, and let's set that value to anonymous. And so now what we'll try to do is, let me just see if we can get, let me just refresh this quickly. All right, let's see. I don't know if it's propagated yet. All right, it might take a second for the environment variable to get applied. But as I see the query here, the kind of interesting thing about this, or let me actually just enable this token for now so that we can see this working. And I'm seeing that the allow list is failing, and that's because I have allow list enabled already. So sorry, let me just go back and make this to false so that our demo is a little bit clearer. Cool. Let's come back to the console here. Okay. So if I go look at my allow list settings, what I'll see is I'll see what operations I have made in the past and what operations I can use. These are some of the operations I've made in the past. And what I can do is these are the captured queries, right? And so I can make an API call at any point of time to fetch. I can do something like, cloud.hasura.io, project name, whatever. And then I can make a query to fetch the captured queries that Hasura has. And that's kind of what the UI is doing here. It's fetching those historic past queries, right? And so what we'll do here is, we can take this particular thing and we can add it to an allow list, right? So let's take this particular list, this particular query, right? And let's add it to an allow list, right? And you'll see that it gets added to an allow list, right? So now this is added to an allow list, and if we enable allow lists, we'll actually see this validation error in action. So just to kind of recap, there are two things here. The first thing is we're capturing queries and building an allow list, and then we are applying the allow list. So this can also come from various sources, right? The allow list doesn't have to come from captured queries. The allow list can even be kind of extracted from your client-side code as you kind of build your client, so that you can extract that out. But until you apply the allow list, you still only created the allow list, right? You've not actually applied it. And if you want to apply the allow list, we'll have to set up an environment variable. But just to kind of make sure that this is also working, let's just quickly change this to query. Let me just go back to my history here. And I think it was get albums. I think it was a ID less than. I don't even know what allow list query I added. Whoops, give me. So let me look at this operation. That's the query that I've added. So let me just take a look at this query. That was the older query. This is the query that I added. So it's just query, albums, ID, and title, right? And so right now I can make this query, and then and that's kind of what we're seeing here. And if I go back and change this to an allow list, so let's change this to true, right? What we'll see is that when you're making this error, we'll be getting the validation failed error. And that is basically that this query is not allowed to be run. And in fact, Hasura won't leak information about whether it's running to or not. And that will take a second or two to pop up, but we'd already seen that before. And so the idea is that basically what we're doing is you're capturing queries and we're kind of running these queries to see whether or not they're allowed and stuff like that. And because this query is allowed, I'm kind of able to get through. The interesting thing here is that you can use this also for things like regression testing. So you can say that, hey, these are the operations that I've had in the past, and then you can use them to create a regression test suite. And then you can use that to pull the tests. So for example, if I want to run those tests, I can go and run these tests now. Or what I can also do is export these tests, put them into something like Postman test runner, and then run them as well. Everything that we're doing here is also accessible via an API. We'll be uploading the API documentation soon, but every single thing that we're doing here, everything from the monitoring to the logging to the API limits and whatnot, is available over a GraphQL API and over subscriptions as well, so that you can even subscribe to some of these things. Cool. Next, let's take a quick look at. We'll take a look at API limits. So what we're going to do here is configure a small API limit. So let's say we have, let's do IP address. And let's set this to 10 requests per minute. And so what we're saying is basically, if we have the same IP address, then we don't want this, we don't want more than 10 requests per minute from the same IP address. And then we can specify a depth limit as well. Over time, like I was mentioning earlier today, we can also, we'll also be working on a cost or a dynamic cost-based system that will let you allow that. The nice thing here is that because Hasura is kind of auto-scaled out here, these rate limits are kind of applied across these Hasura instances, which is a little bit painful to do. It's easier to do if you have a single Hasura instance, but when you're sharing it across instances, there needs to be some shared state that keeps track of the counter and stuff like that. So as soon as I set this rate limit, and so what I can do is, we can go and make a bunch of queries. So, let's go back to my history tab. And if I make a bunch of queries, I'm just going to make a few. Right? And I made about 10, and you can see that the rate limit has exceeded, right? And you'll also see this pop up in your operation error logs, so that you know that there are rate limiting errors, right? So you can sort that and say, I want to check for rate limit errors, and you'll find those rate limited errors as well. Sorry, let me just go here and show to you folks here that these are the kind of these are the queries that I was trying to run, which are erroring out. Next, what we'll take a quick look at is sorry, just to show you the rate limit here. So the next thing I'll show you is caching. So what we'll look at is, again, the same example. Let's just take a particular query. I'm just going to enable admin again. So let's say we're running a query, which is the same query that I'm going to have, so I don't have to type that in again. Right? And so what we can see for this particular query is this particular query has a response time, right? So if I go back here and I look at the operation response time, right, I'll see that this has taken 24 milliseconds to run. If I go ahead and add a cache directive to it, what I'll see is, oops, let me just disable my allow list. Well done, me. Was good for us to see that cache headers are also respected with allow lists. So let me disable that. I'm just gonna apply this configuration. That'll take a second. But maybe what I can do is show you a past operation that I had. So let's see if I had a cached operation, I can show you the difference here. And just a second, while I load that up. All right, here we have a few examples. Cool. Let's just see if I'm back here so that we can try this out quickly. All right. So now I'm running it with the cache directive, and when I'm running it with the cache directives, you can see the difference that I will get in the speed. This is something that has now crossed my amazing rate limit. But what we'll see is we can go back to our operations tab, and we can take a look at the differences that we're seeing in the execution times for these queries, right? So, for example, you can see that these queries are taking, let's say, 26 milliseconds, 27 milliseconds. These are down to 2 milliseconds. So that's kind of the that's kind of the way the caching system works. There are a few features and toggles. The caching system is still experimental. So there are a few toggles that you can use. So for example, you can set a TTL and then make sure that that particular query is cached only for that period of time. There's some important nuances to this because, for example, when you're doing this, one of the things is that you'll have to ensure that you're also using it along with an allow list, right? So that you're adding the add cache system to the allow list. And the allow list system is the exact same way that it works when you're running Hasura yourself or locally or deploying it wherever. So in the exact same method that you were using allow list there, you can also use add cache to add an allow list there. There is another idea that we have, which is of exposing caching as purely a server-side primitive, but having it available as a client-side directive makes it much easier to experiment with and play around with, because that way the client is also in control of when they will see inconsistent results and when they don't want to see inconsistent results, which is a useful control to have. But since this is an experimental, this might change a little bit in terms of the way that it's set up, but you can start using it for certain heavy operations today, especially if it's role specific. So that kind of roughly covers the kinds of stuff that I wanted to show you for being able to kind of make sure that you have some amount of insight and control into what's going on when you have a service in production. In a future community call, maybe perhaps the one that we have, I think we've canceled the one for this month, I'm not sure. But in the next community call, we'll show an integration with kind of Datadog and tracing with actions and remote schemas so that you can see that come together as well, which is a little bit, which is very, very interesting to check out. I think that should be it from my side. Please do try it out. Let us know if you have any questions. I did see a few questions pop up regarding Hasura Cloud in general, and so I can take a few of them very quickly. The first is whether Hasura Cloud auto-scales. Yes, that's the entire point, that you don't have to worry about how many instances and things that you have. There were some other questions about regions and region selection. So by default, Hasura, we have a few regions in which Hasura is already available. Technically all regions on AWS, and we'll be expanding to other cloud vendors soon as well. It shouldn't matter, but being on the same cloud vendor will allow you to take advantage of some security features like VPC peering. Although IP whitelisting will always work as well, so that even if your database is on Google Cloud SQL, you can connect it to Hasura, which is running, wherever it's running with an IP whitelist. So we'll have it running on other cloud vendors soon as well. We're also probably going to expose a region setting so that you can explicitly choose what regions you'd like to support. And this could be, you might want to choose regions that are closer to your users, or you might want to choose regions and along with regions that are also close to your database. And you can kind of leverage different kinds of practices with that. So for example, for users, for Hasura that is closer to the edge, you can take advantage of caching. And for Hasura that is closer to the database, well, that's always better because the query performance is going to be a little bit better for those for those situations. So that's it from me. Please do try this out. Let us know what you think. We're still, I think, a few weeks away from having this out on stable. Thanks so much. Radoshi, over to you.